snakes.
It's always interesting to me how the icon carver's brain works, because you need something. If God's moving through a person, it's like, well, how do you portray that? If you're making the action figure, what does he look like, right? And there's this amazing conversation, not to get us too far derailed, between Lucas, Kasdan, and Spielberg when they were developing Indiana Jones. And the conversation you can find, and they're like, well, he needs a different kind of weapon. What's a weapon no one's had? Like, how about a whip, right? And we need him to have a hat, but the hat should have a personality, it should have a life of its own. And so part of when we're trying to substantiate, when we're trying to make literal the symbolism, it can't just be that God, like if a wizard just points at somebody, well, what's a wizard look like? We need props. The Pharaoh has right? And so this is, of course, something that you are dealing with in your depictions, or else everyone would just look like a Ken doll, right? Everyone would look the same.
Yeah, but I think modern fiction has actually been very good. Like something like fantasy, like Tolkien, the way they illustrate it, has been very good at making the costumes and the representation of the person as an extension of what they are, so that you see it immediately.
That's why Gandalf is such a striking figure with his staff, and that he can thrust it into the ground with force and cause.
That's how I imagine Moses doing it.
Right. Bang, exactly.
Not like this.
That's
like
Jonathan.
this.
That's how Jonathan carves too. He just shows up.
I just like.
We don't ever want to confuse freedom with chaos. They're not the same thing. If you're playing a chess game, you're free to do an almost infinite number of things on the chess game board, but you have to abide by the rules, and you have to attempt to win in the proper manner, and I used to play a game with my students in my class, and I'd go up to someone when we were talking about such things and say, okay, do you want to play a game? Some random student, and they'd say yes. And I'd say, okay, you move first. And then they had no idea what to do. It's like, well, and I said, well, you could do anything you wanted. It's like, well, I'm lost. It's like, yeah, that's exactly. When you can do anything you want, you think that's freedom.
You better not ask the wrong student that.
Yeah, I wouldn't ask you. All right. And the magicians
we're now hitting what I consider the funniest verse in the Torah.
All right. And the magicians of Egypt did so with their enchantments.
Okay, why is that so funny?
Because there's no more water to turn into blood.
Well, they're doing what Moses did, and they're judging too.
They're saying to Pharaoh, hey, we can ruin our water supply too. I have always found this to be hilarious. Doesn't Pharaoh go, what are you, morons?
Right.
Yeah. He ruins the water and you can do it too? Thank you.
Don't they do the same later with the gnats or the flies? He says just to add to it. Yeah.
They can't.
That is very
they also say it's all the water in the land is already turned. So it's like, what are they, like they're seeking out new water to ruin?
They had some water, apparently.
Kids, magicians.
Kids in Jewish life sing the following song. There were, one morning when Pharaoh woke in his bed, there were frogs on his head and frogs in his bed, frogs on his nose and frogs on his toes, frogs here, frogs there, frogs were jumping everywhere.
Well, this is a kind of comical plague.
Exactly, certainly, but the point that I love about that is the only reason these kids know about Pharaoh is because of the frogs. The king, the demigod of Egypt, is known to Jewish children thousands of years later because of frogs.
Did Nietzsche say, you might think you're done with the past, but that doesn't mean the past thinks it's done with you. And that's like...
By the way, you've made me rethink Nietzsche. Mm-hmm. I just wanted you to know, he had a lot of profound things to say.
Oh, yeah. He's something.
I assume he has such a bad name because the Nazis liked him. I mean, why does he have such a bad name?
His sister warped a lot of his writing, and then there were derivatives of it that were used by the Nazis to justify their actions. But Nietzsche's philosophy is he had an absolute horror of absolutist states, and that's crystal clear. And so,
and the consequences of the death of God.
Oh yes, and there's no one more prophetic about that except maybe Dostoevsky.
And he always spoke very highly of you, Dennis.
Thank you. I didn't want to say.
And there's a negative miracle aspect here too. It might be that people are less convinced about positive miracles, but if something negative enough happens to you, that's outside your realm of expectation, sometimes that can actually wake you up.
You have an example?
Solzhenitsyn?
death or a catastrophe in your life.
I see. Oh, that's it. But the people see that as a miracle, though.
Well, that's a good question. We tend to think of a miracle as only something positive, but these plagues are obviously miracles.
That's right. I like that. That's fascinating.
And it's a lot more difficult to deny a negative miracle. Yeah.
I've never thought of that. Am I happy I came?
Yeah, there's nothing happier than a negative miracle, man.
I always think of
Here's a fascinating, truly fascinating thing about the Hebrew, where it says stiffened. He stiffened his. First of all, he did it to himself. He stiffened his heart. Okay. So I hope I can make this clear, and if I do, you'll find this fascinating. The word is vayichbad, which literally means made heavy. Okay, there's no one would doubt that. I'm not reading anything into it. Kaved means heavy in Hebrew. Now here's the beauty. Honor your father and mother. The commandment is the same exact verb. Honor literally means make heavy. You should hold your parents. No, you should hold your parents in a heavy way. That's what it really etymologically means. It's correct to translate it as honor, but it literally means make your parents heavy in your eyes. So here's the killer. There is another way of therefore translating this, and it just occurred to me today. I wish when I wrote my commentary, I realized this. You can actually translate this as Pharaoh honored his heart and didn't send the people out.
Dennis, you eventually go one higher. The glory of God is the same word. In other words,
That's
God's
correct.
glory
That is right.
the ultimate weightiness
How'd you know that?
in the universe. No, I think, compared with...
He's smart.
Yeah.
Compared with Milan Kundera.
We know.
But you've got the reverse of Milan Kundera, the unbearable...
That was precious.
Dennis knows some stuff.
That is clear beyond
It's a
doubt.
constant shock.
That's correct. That is the word. That is exactly for honor and glory.
The ultimate reality
Yes.
of reality has weightiness.
That's right.
Yeah.
When you fast, this is something very cool about fasting, and of course it makes perfect sense from an evolutionary perspective, is when you fast enough so that you start digesting your own body tissues, the body tissue that you digest first is the damaged tissue. And so then you can die a little bit, because that's what happens when you're starting to consume yourself, is you die a little bit, but the consequence of that is that you live longer. There are studies on rats showing that if you have them fast regularly, and that keeps them at a suboptimal body weight, they'll live up to 40% longer.
But they're also way more irritable.
Well, yes, they're
So you got irritable
but then
rats.
you're
you're like,
knee-deep
great,
in angry
great,
rats,
another
and they
year
live
with an
forever.
angry rat. Right. Gotta be careful.
Is that true, by the way? Are they more irritable?
No.
Not at all.
He just knows he's more irritable.
Because I'd never heard that, and I was curious. Anyway, how would you know if a rat is irritable? Now that I think of it, they're not exactly benevolent.
They're weightier.
As a general,
They're more condensed into their essential ratitude.
My goodness.
One of the things I've been thinking about in relation to the Russia-Ukraine war is that, well, how often did people sit down with Putin in the last 3 years? Like almost never? Well, if he has a tilt towards paranoia, and he is a Russian, so he might, then that's not such a good idea. And you don't know. And I would say that's one thing perhaps that Trump was good at, to sit down with people like Kim Jong-un and perhaps with Putin, and to at least be there in the same room with them in some credible way. We have no idea how much international peace depends on those strange bonds of at least quasi-trust that are forged not as a consequence of the shared propositional beliefs, but just as a consequence of that recognition of common humanity. It isn't obvious at all to what degree you can get that in the deepest sense through
When you eat
mere
with
abstract
someone,
communication.
Eating with someone is probably one of the most primordial things that you can do. It is so profound that it's like it's beyond rational discussion. It precedes any political discussion you could have, which is why it's so traditional for heads of state to eat together, to have...
You can at least see that they don't steal your food. Well, there were times, or kill you for it. There were times where that was like, especially if you're eating with a stranger, that was a crucial issue, especially if you were both actually hungry. So it was a real test of well, it really is a real test of civilization to see if people can sit down and share a meal.
When I speak to singles on my radio show, it's I'm just realizing it now because of this discussion. So it goes from if they meet through an internet site, which by the way, I recommend to singles all the time. Mm-hmm. And they meet through an internet site. So then they will email, then they will talk, mm-hmm. then they might video, mm-hmm. then they rarely go for a meal. They'll meet at Starbucks.
Right.
When it graduates to a meal, everybody knows this is a bit more serious.
This is the beginning of something intimate.
A meal. So it's a very interesting thing about the meal.
Yeah. Well, it's a very embodied act. Unlike the rest of those acts that can be mediated electronically.
Well, Starbucks is embodied too, but it's not a meal.
Right.
It's a coffee.
Right. You don't use your teeth on coffee.
By the way, this food thing just occurred to me because I had thought about this, but I forgot about it until now. So in the Holy of Holies is the Ark with the 10 Commandments and one other thing, a table. Mm-hmm. And in Jewish life, the table is the center of religious life. It is the table at home is more important than the synagogue. Ask any religious Jew. There's no debate about what I'm saying. The center of Jewish religious life is the house, and the center of religious life in the house is the table. And I can say that the Friday night Shabbat dinner and Saturday Shabbat lunch in my upbringing were more formative than any other single event. It is where I learned to think, learned to speak. There was no tolerance for a stupid comment from me. And I learned, because my brother's 6 years older, so he dominated conversation with my father at the Shabbat table. And then when I finally spoke up, I remember the very first time I spoke up, my father said, "That's bullshit." And it was the greatest thing he could have said to me. There was no, "Oh, that's really sweet, Dennis. What a thought." I got none of that. And to this day, I have always asked when I speak, what would my father say?
That is what you should ask when you speak.
That's right.
That's a prayer, man.
Is it possible to not feel sad for the Egyptians and to not feel sympathy and to not wish that the Pharaoh had broken before? And it's like you get there and you're like, oh.
Dennis, how about you?
I hope Pharaoh gets his.
Yeah.
I admit.
I knew I could count on
what
you.
What about the
regard.
Egyptians?
I was like, that's why I was just waiting. I was
Is that a good sign or a bad sign?
Well,
we
he's
know
clearly
Dennis
the
likes
villain.
revenge.
He's clearly the villain. And
yes,
there
exactly. I want villains to get punished. I don't know.
But do you want the villains to learn before they have to pay the ultimate price?
That's such a Christian question.
I know. That's why I want to get Prager's take on this.
I don't give a damn if they learn before they die. I want them to die. Yeah. Because I'm more concerned with good people. I don't want good people to suffer. So whether Pharaoh learns or not is between Pharaoh and Pharaoh. But between Pharaoh and me, he has to be punished. But the great lesson, which is, of course, unlearned, like most great lessons, is people do really like tyrants. What percentage of Harvard seniors do you think could identify Pol Pot? I would say 5%.
Yeah, I think you're probably being optimistic on that front.
Okay.
I mean, when I taught about the Gulag catastrophes or the catastrophes of the Soviet Union,
Gulag too. Just say
hardly
Gulag.
any of my students have ever heard of any of that.
Hardly any of them today have heard of Solzhenitsyn.
Yeah.
Oh, sir. Oh, that's a given. But Pol Pot, one of the great mass murderers, he killed a quarter of his own people. By the way, these tyrants killed. Hitler is the only of the tyrants that didn't mostly slaughter his own people. Yeah. Pol Pot killed Cambodians, Mao killed Chinese, Stalin killed Russians. And they're still held in esteem.
How about Mussolini?
Well, he wasn't a mass murderer. He's not in their category. He was a tyrant, but he's not in their category. Italians don't make that type.
The Italians make lousy tyrants.
Yeah.
All right, so back to 11:1 here. And thus ye shall eat it, with your loins girded. Now you gird your loins for battle, eh? And girding your loins what does that refer to precisely? What do you do when you gird your loins?
Probably to be ready to escape. I think it was
You just tie all the stuff up. Tie it all up. That's what it is.
Right.
The girdle. I mean,
so you're preparing.
You've got your belt cinched.
No, but it says
You're ready to
belt.
leave. Yeah. Okay. So you're
They didn't
prepared.
wear underwear in that time. They didn't wear underwear. So if you're going to do something that demands a lot of, you would gird your loins.
Okay.
Yeah, no one needs to go freestyle off into what's coming
Into
here.
the desert.
No, that's right. It's not a good
Commando.
Not a
Get
good
ready to
look.
roll.
That's exactly. It's right.
So this is probably not known. I may well be known at this table, but I don't think for the general public, because in the West we identify blood with death, and in the Torah blood is identified with life.
Life. Yes.
Which it is. And by the way, it says it in Genesis, one of the few times that there is a law in Genesis. You may not eat the blood, ki hadam hu anefesh, because the blood is the soul of the living thing.
Yeah, but I think for Christians, it's the same. Like we wouldn't say things like we're saved by the blood of Christ if we didn't believe that it was life that was poured over us.
He was
So welcome.
Also, as a symbol, I mean, it's
I didn't say that. I just said he was Jewish.
No, but I'm curious about this idea of putting the blood on the post. If you had some
Yes, that's
insights
what about
that.
it. It's affirming life. If
Well, if God wasn't
didn't
on the side of
smite,
the Jews, he'd sure know where they
then,
were.
Hey, a Jew lives here, and we're in trouble.
But it's a symbol that anticipates the second Passover, because I think there are two Passovers. There's the first Passover,
Yes.
right?
Well, the second one is if you miss the first.
Right.
It's very interesting law. In case you were out of town, you really have a chance at a second one.
But I mean, the second Passover through the people of Israel pass over the Red Sea. That is to say.
You didn't mean literally.
No,
that there is a second
the sea
Passover
parts.
in Numbers. I'm sorry?
Yeah.
That's because Jews are always late.
there's also
All non-wasps are late. That's a funny thing I realize. One of the reasons I am a waspophile.
Part of white privilege.
I love it. I am a waspophile. I think this is a great invention, the Anglo-Saxon Protestant. I really do. They made the greatest country in the world. What else can I say? And so everybody thinks Jews are late, and they go, "Oh, Jewish Standard Time." Then I, in my interaction with other communities, Armenians, Armenian Standard Time, Iranian Standard Time. Then I realized every bloody group except white Anglo-Saxon Protestants is late.
We're hoping you guys will catch up, man.
I love it. When things start on time, I show up at speeches differently if ethnics invite me or if it's a Presbyterian church that invites me. By the way, forgive me, but you'll love this. When a Jewish kid, a religious kid raised in a religion, speaks about the Exodus, not just kid, I take that back, adults, we always say we were slaves, and that's the way it is in the Haggadah, not they were slaves. I wish Americans said we, forgive me, fought the British. Or we fought for independence.
You're welcome back anytime, Dan.
I don't know if you'll want us right now. This is a very serious problem.
Make America
I just
great
want to
Britain again.
add two very exactly correct.
Okay. So I would like to point out that we've got through one verse so far. That we should probably proceed.
Well, it was a biggie.
It was a big one. It was a big one.
We need to get Shapiro in here reading.
7 days.
By the way, I will get a ski jet. Is that what it's called?
Jet
I will buy one for anyone who could name all the holidays of the Torah.
Now, does this include all the people who are listening? Careful what you offer.
Send in your responses. No, I'm serious. Do you think you could? It's an interesting question. And by the way, there are 7. Again, 7.
Oh, I can't.
Come on, Greg.
Oh,
Don't let us down.
I'm going to kick this to Oz.
You've got us, Dennis.
The vast majority of Jews couldn't do it. They would, because one is very obscure, and I have all right, so Shabbat, Rosh Hashanah, which is called the Day of Trumpets, Yom Kippur, Passover, Pentecost, Shavuot, Tabernacle, Sukkot, and then the 7th, which is the one that trips up everybody, including most Jews, called Shmini Atzeret. It's his own holiday. It's after the 7 days of Tabernacles is the 8th day. Shmini means 8th. Atzeret is convocation, meeting. It is the only holiday that has no purpose other than having a good time. It doesn't commemorate anything. It is a fascinating thing. So I don't work on Jewish holidays that are in the Torah. So I remember many of you know Larry Elder, who ran for governor in California, a dear friend of mine. So we used to be on the same station in Los Angeles. And I would be on in the afternoon, and he would follow me in his talk show. And so I said, so Larry, I just want you to know I won't be on tomorrow. Oh, he goes, why? I said, well, I don't broadcast on Jewish holidays. And he goes, which holiday is it? And I go, Shmini Atzeret. And the guy was convinced I made it up to take the day off.